Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel Springboard Thought. Today I'm going to be talking about David Mitchell's Black Swan Green, which is the 5th book I've read of his total. I'm reading all of them in a little attempt to get to know all of the interconnected stories. If you don't know, David Mitchell's stories are quite interconnected, some books more than others. There's a meta component that has forces that are kind of good and evil battling. Some of that is overt in some books. Other times it's just characters that reoccur, or their children, or their children's children, or them as children. And so there's like on a long enough timeline, you can kind of place all of these characters all over the place between all of his books, of which there are 8. This is my 5th step, and so I probably am missing some components to other stories. I still have his newest book, Utopia Avenue, Ghost Written, and Number 9 Dream to check out, so there might be some stuff that I'm missing, but I'm going to give a brief review of the book, what I thought of it, then I'm going to go into spoilers, and then I'm also going to talk about how I think it relates to the other books. And so if you haven't read other books that I am going to be talking about, in this one it's Cloud Atlas and the Bone Clocks most predominantly. There's not too bad of a spoiler on that one, so I might do it before I hit spoiler territory, just for people who kind of want to know but don't want to know spoilers of this specific book, and then we'll go from there. So this is the story of Jason Taylor at 13 years old in 1981 across 1982. His family has moved to Black Swan Green recently. They are not natives to the town and are sort of treated as such. Noticeably, his sister is much older, or at least a few years older, and is going out to college around the same time. In the beginning of the book, she's around. In the latter half of the book, she's already gone, is the sort of timeline. And his parents are having a tumultuous time, I would say, and Jason has a number of different sort of coming of age things that he needs to confront in this book, which is the overall arc of the story. It is not sprawling as you might expect from other David Mitchell books. It's just one person's contained story. They do kind of work like short stories across the year, but there's not multiple viewpoints. It's just him, and there's not a overt, at least to me, meta component going on, though I could be wrong about that depending on when I consume the other books. The main thing that we see Jason struggling with is his speech impediment, which is not too severe, but severe enough that he gets bullied for it and he has to see a speech therapist for it. We see a schism in Jason's identity, which is sort of not perhaps like a trope of coming of age, but it's handled quite well. He refers to his speech impediment as the hangman, so when he reaches words that he can't say, it feels like a presence is weighing on him and sort of taking over his body, his agency. And he calls this like mashing down on words, where he starts stuttering. And the way that he combats this is by foreseeing what he is going to say in the future and then working around it, or switching the words, or waiting enough time where it stops being a problem and then saying it. And otherwise, though, the hangman is like a constant oppressive force that is making his childhood worse and worse as he sees it. He also is a little bit of a poet. He goes by a pen name, Elliot Bolivar, which rings a little bit of a bell for me in terms of other books, like characters, but I can't exactly place why. So once I'm done this series, I might Google it and see if there's connections to other books to see if I've missed that. But anyway, he sends in his poems to a local magazine, and they place it under they print it under his pen name, And nobody really seems to know about this, although there's allusions to a couple of people in his life kind of figuring it out. He also finally has another separate component, and that is something that David Mitchell does with some of his characters, in that when they have sort of nasty thoughts, kind of the devil on their shoulder telling you what you should do, that's usually selfish and usually to the detriment of somebody else. And he calls those thoughts in his mind the other twin, or maggot. It kind of goes throughout the book as an interchangeable thing. And so he's really kind of shaping his identity and who he wants to be. It's riveting and it's well written. The voices, again, as David Mitchell always seems to be, is well realized. There's a lot of dialect speech happening, so that the voices really come alive. The characters all very distinct. You never get lost wondering who is who in the story. There's a couple coming of age things that are happening that work in a humorous level as well. There's like someone who might be a witch out in a cabin that helps him when he falls on the ice and hurts his ankle. He has damaged something that is given to him by his father at the beginning of the book, Watch, and it's sort of like the moral quandary throughout the novel. And there's the parents' relationship, which is very much on the rocks and making it so that he has to side with one or the other, so that there's a lot of choices that Jason has to engage with and sort of chart the future. He's also very preoccupied with being cool, looking interesting and good, and the speech impediment works against him, of course. He sees life as a pecking order where the boys are ranked and he's sort of like middle grade. He's like a little bit cool, but he's got the speech impediment, and then his friend is a lower grade than that, Morin. And so they're kind of, Morin is basically his only fairly true friend throughout it. And we basically just follow Jason throughout the entire school year of all these different social aspects hitting him and him dealing with it in various ways. But most of it worked for me. I rated it 3.5, rated up to 4 stars. It does tend to drag a little bit in the middle, and it's very interesting because we see Jason having some pretty profound thoughts about life, even though he's navigating very like samey circumstances that kids need to deal with, like bullying and not the speech impediment thing, of course, but something that some kids need to go with. But everything else feels pretty similar to what you would read of any adolescent story. But the way that it's dealt with is quite interesting. The thematic through line is constantly there. There is a really big concern with prejudice in all of its forms, from the speech impediment thing to actual racism against Romani people in the town, who are very much against them setting up like a temporary settlement in which some of these people can stay close to but not actually in the town. There's like the tight-knit othering of people from the town who are in the in-group, and the people that haven't kind of earned their place in it yet, and how they might earn that place, including Jason. There's a sort of like initiation that seems kind of almost cultish for the boys to perform with him. It's all very interesting, I thought. So for mild spoiler territory, I will say that Hugo Lamb, who is in the Bone Clocks, has made an appearance, and once again I'll show you my tabbing, my colored tabbing, which is good quotes. Pink is the Cattle Atlas tie-in, and blue is the Bone Clock tie-in. And Hugo Lamb is a fairly main character. He's got a chapter dedicated to him in the Bone Clocks. This chapter works like fantastic foreshadowing for that character. Everything you kind of know about Lamb and can assume, and his sort of trajectory in life and where it will take him based on his interactions with Jason, and also as a force of which Jason needs to butt heads with against and see if he's going to be amoral or moral. Kind of works really well if you know Lamb's character. And yeah, that scene was just very interesting, and it was alluded to in the Bone Clocks as well. He is talking with somebody in which he tells them about the time that he made Jason Taylor smoke a cigarette or something like that. The interaction in this book is a lot more detailed than that and lasts an entire chapter, though. A lot more happens than just a smoking cigarette, of course. There is also a really cool tie-in with Cloud Atlas in the Frobisher story. If you know it, he is cooped up with Vivian Ayres, a composer, of which time while he's there, he sort of falls in love with the composer while also cheating on the composer with his wife. And during that process, he drafts the Cloud Atlas Sextet, which reoccurs throughout in all of his books, basically, that I've read so far. It's alluded to or referenced in some way. And in this book, we actually get to meet the daughter of that couple, who makes an appearance in Cloud Atlas as well. She only meets Frobisher for a short while, and it's always a pretty charged reaction as far as I remember. It's been a minute. But yeah, she appears in this story, and she sort of acts as a somewhat mentor for the poet side of Jason / Elliot, and that was really cool tie-in as well. So for outright spoilers for this book, of which there won't be too much, I just want to wrap up some plot threads so that if I ever go back to this and watch the video, I'll be able to see exactly what I thought of it and know the narrative through line. So much of it I see as just Jason having to butt up against forces and sort of forge his character, which I thought was really interesting given the context that we now know of the meta-narrative being the horologists versus the carnivores, which don't appear in this story whatsoever. At least none of the characters that I know of identify as names of the people or whatever. I don't see them reoccurring here, except for Hugo Lamb, who becomes a carnivore, of course. But if Hugo Lamb represents the sort of corrupting force life brings into Jason's life at the beginning, I really like that, because he really does feel like he's like low-key trying to decide how cool he needs to be and what he'll do to achieve that, and whether he's going to actually compromise his ideals or not. And some of which he kind of does, like he doesn't rat on his cousin in front of Hugo Lamb, even though it's kind of the right thing to do. Hugo Lamb steals stuff from a shop and implicates him, and he still does nothing about that either. And Hugo Lamb, we can see already starting his little grift where he's known in the Bone Clocks to shave all of his friends of their money, basically, and thinks he's quite like the suave con artist / womanizer, etc. And it's almost like a grim foreboding that Jason sees him as a role model that he wants to become at some point. So I wonder if Jason reoccurs in anything, and if I've just missed it, like as Elliot Bolivar, as I mentioned. It would be interesting if Elliot shows up later, and I'm thinking that potentially in the Bone Clocks chapters with Crispin as the writer, if he shows up there with some awards or something, or just in the party with the writers, something like that would make sense where he would show up. Crispin Hershey's chapter that I didn't, the only part of Bone Clocks that I didn't really get on with, really. But that would be interesting, and I'm definitely interested to see if Jason goes anywhere in future stories like Utopia Avenue or whatever. It seems like he would be an interesting character still. And of course, the narrative through line is him dealing with his that he lied to his dad and his parents about the watch that he broke, which we find out is very much an antique and very expensive. It's like 850 pounds to get a new one, which is a lot, especially since this takes place in 1981, 1982. And the witch out in the cabin, I really liked a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if she's somewhere else that I don't know yet or haven't noticed in other books. Jason kind of sees what might be construed as a supernatural occurrence in which he's on a lake and skating. And once he makes a revolution around this rink in the lake, he's sort of talking to himself, but there's like a conversation happening with something else. It seems to him like almost like a fever dream where he's talking to somebody else, and then he falls and he hurts his leg a lot. He limps to the nearby cottage with this person who's characterized as like unhinged or mentally ill. We're not really sure, and she takes care of him. She puts a poultice, I think is the right word, a poultice on his knee, and it's like healed within a few hours or whatever. And when he goes to leave, the door is locked, and he goes into the witch's room to see how she is, and it sounds like a death rattle is happening and she dies, and he freaks out, and then that's the end of that chapter until the very end of the book, where we see that she's fine and alive. So I wonder if a horologist has possessed her, because we know in The Thousand Autumns and in the Bone Clocks that when people ostensibly die, horologists can then possess them, like Marinus has done before. So that would be interesting to know. And it doesn't really add too much to the plot, but there's a through line where we're like, oh, the witch wasn't a witch, of course, right? Which is kind of like a small town, adolescent, big fish type thing happening. Also, there is a internal struggle in which the boys that have been bullied, Jason finally gets a sort of revenge on that's justified. It isn't him hurting them physically. He is taking them down a peg with his mind, in which they keep trying to extort him, and he rats them out in such a way that they get in trouble or expelled. He goes to Goose Festival at one point, and he sees his dad, and he's with his buddy, but he finds a wallet with like 600 or so quid in it, and he eventually finds out that the boy who has it is sort of the big bully of him, and he imagines a scenario in which he goes and gives it back to the boy, and everything's sort of fine. There's a row between this boy and this girl, and it causes the girl to cheat on him, but nonetheless it comes out as Jason being the hero. And then we learn that no, that actually didn't happen. The girl and the boy did break up, and he caught the girl sleeping with somebody else, and he takes a motorcycle because he's so freaked out about his wallet being lost. And we learn that he's so freaked out because his dad is known for beating people in this family, so he's probably bullied his own son, and he has a wife who has been driven away because he beat her black and blue. And so, freaking out, he takes to the road with this motorcycle and gets in an accident that hurts his leg. And so there's both good and bad things that Jason chooses by the end. And so that's why I wonder what he will be like in the future, as far as like horologist, carnivore, and just what kind of man he will become. There's also a really annoying bit where, since it's the 1980s, gay is used as a pejorative all the time, which pissed me off, and it is like about that kind of with prejudice. But it also seems like there's a bunch of instances in which it's supposed to be queer undertones with Jason, yet all of the times that he is depicted as like sexually active, it's around women and stuff. So I was kind of wondering at first if this was homophobia directed at him wondering if he was gay or not, but instead it was just kind of, I guess, supposed to be there as reminding you that it's a slur in the 1980s, along with gypsy, which shouldn't be said anymore, instead of Romani. I guess those two things kind of work together okay in the narrative, but not so much that I wanted to hear every single thing that boys weren't into at the time as a pejorative for gay. Next book I'm going to read is going to be, I think, Number 9 Dream, and that is because it was mentioned in this book, and it was mentioned mostly as the song, I think, but it still feels like an emergent jump for me to go from here to there. It is reverse chronological order, but whatever. It'll be interesting to go from Bone Clocks, or 1,000 Autumns to Bone Clocks to Slade House, and then go backwards chronologically and then to the very last book. It seems like that's what will happen, but you know, it seems like you could just do whatever you want with these books mostly, although I would recommend definitely that arc of 1,000 Autumns, Bone Clocks, and Slade House, which feels very satisfying from the meta component. I filmed this on an overcast day because it feels very British. It's raining today. It feels thematically cogent. It fits Black Swan Green perfectly. Anyway, I'll see you next time. Bye.